Welcome to the Failing Up podcast. Today we're talking to Shelby Ryburn. Shelby has so much incredible experience, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about what it was like to struggle being away from her family at points in her life where her business was thriving, but personally she felt like she was struggling, and how she got past that. We're so glad Shelby could join us today. Come dive in with us.
Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Failing Up podcast, humble lessons in life and business. My name's David Huffaker. I'm your host. I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Dr. Laurna Taylor.
Hi there, everybody.
In the house, and had you on a few episodes.
I know. I'm glad to be back.
Glad to have you back. And our amazing guest, Miss Shelby.
Hello.
Take a minute and introduce yourself. Tell people why you're so amazing.
Oh my, no pressure. Amazing.
No pressure.
I'm not sure I describe myself that way. Let's see. Shelby Ryburn. I run the More Real Estate Group with my partners in the greater Sacramento, California area. Also an operating partner of a Keller Williams franchise in the Carolinas, and married and a mom to a 9-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl. Most important part.
That is the most important part. I didn't know you were an OP.
I am.
In the Carolinas, so you're in Mark's, is that Mark's region?
Territory, yeah. Mark Brenneman.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's a good guy. I like him.
Yeah.
How do you like leading that from California?
Well, that's an interesting story.
Yeah.
I was actually the team leader there in 2014 in the same market center for 3 years. Just put my head down and went to work. They said, do this. I did that. And we did really well together. I had an amazing team. It was one of those moments where you go, oh my gosh, every person on the bus is like focused, has the same vision, the same trajectory, the same work ethic, the same commitment level. And we just put our head down and came together and wound up in the top 10 of the market centers globally. Amazing. And that was really fun. But then I left and went back to California in 2017 because after I had my daughter, I remember specifically flying back to the Carolinas after being home in California for Christmas. And my son was 2 and she was 6 months old. And I didn't want to go back to the Carolinas because in that moment I realized that my kids only got glimpses of time with my family versus living life with my family.
Yeah.
And, I think God designs men and women differently. But for me, I needed my kids to do life with my family. And so we moved back. And then I don't feel like I really ever departed from Keller Williams Fort Mill, which is now Keller Williams Connected, because I was so ingrained there. One of my strengths and weaknesses is being all in on things. And so I was all in on those people. And so anytime anything happened, I got calls about it anyway in the 5 years I was gone. Yeah. So by the time they called me and said, do you want to be OP? And I was like, I live in California. And then they called me again and they said, but will you be interim OP? I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But that was a year and a half ago.
Yeah. Interim OP for, interim. That's how you get them. I get it.
That's how you get them. That's the trick, right?
So we have Rob Talbot is in our, lives here locally now, right?
He does?
Yeah.
He moved here?
He'll be there tomorrow.
Oh my gosh.
During our summit.
I love him.
They moved here a few years ago. And so he and I have gotten to know each other as OPs. And so he has market centers in California. So he's doing the reverse, right? He came to Tennessee and is leading market. And I love that role. I was talking to Andy Peters the other day about it. The freedom and flexibility to be able to lead a business from a distance.
Yeah.
Right? When you have the right people, it's an amazing role.
I think we've been trained up that way. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. That was great. All right. So it's funny how every one of these podcasts turns into a little bit more of a parenting lesson in family.
Every time.
It probably is less about real estate and more about our growth, and we see that showing up and manifesting itself in our life outside. So walk us through failure, right? What do you think of when you think about failure? What does that mean to you? What does Shelby think of when that topic comes up?
So I think I automatically think of two things, and I know that you've done several of these podcasts, and I thought to myself, what's the right answer? What's the wrong answer? And I think that the right answer or the wrong answer is whatever is right or wrong for you experientially, right? So I think the two things that strike me most is, number one, as I indicated, I tend to be all in on things and very present where my feet are, and oftentimes feel like there is more to do, even if that might be more than someone else would do and thinks is sufficient. So actually before I came back into real estate in 2013, I was working in corporate America in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I oversaw 10 offices in the Carolinas and their core 4, which was recruiting, training and development for under 5-year sales reps, 100 100% commission sales reps, their internship program, which was in America's top 10, and leadership development for 10 offices. Thankfully, I didn't have children yet because they would have never seen me. But I just naturally become that person that is always wanting to do more or do better. And I have learned that I have no boundaries. And what that resulted in 2013 was I started to get consistent back pain, like to the extent that I went to the doctor. And by the way, my parents raised me to like, you don't go to the doctor unless your arm's falling off.
Right.
But I was like, something's really wrong. Like I'll just get out of a chair and my back like completely goes out
over
and over.
I
thought it was normal. Right. But at that point in time, David, let's be clear. I was only 32.
Yeah,
okay. This is a problem at 32. Maybe not at 43 now. And then I started to have all this wild stomach pain, and my stomach is like a rock. Like I can eat anything and be fine, but it was like fire over and over and over again at the same time that my back was going out. And then I started having chest pains, and it was actually my obstetrician that said, Shelby, I think something's wrong in your life. Like, do you not know that these are like warning.
I wouldn't like seriously. Now I would know that, but you're right. Like at 32, I wouldn't have recognized the relationship between the physical pain and something being off somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think that the longer we live and the more experiences that we have, the more hopefully we learn about ourselves. As long as we take a step back and reflect. And at that point in time, I was so focused on achievement of whatever it was. And by the way, they were my own standards and own goals. I'd already achieved everything the company had set out to achieve, but it just was not enough for me. And so I kept working, and I would go to work at 6:30 in the morning, and my husband would call me at 7 at night and be like, are you coming home? Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, what time is it?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, we've all
been there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'd go home, and the sweet guy would have dinner ready, and I'd eat it, and then we'd sit on the couch, and I'd open my laptop back up, and then at like 11:30 at night, he'd be like, hey, you fell asleep. Do you think we should go to bed? Right? Yeah. And I'd do it all over the next day. And so my wiring is my wiring. And I was telling Dr. Laurna, like, God made me that way for some reason. And so I just have to find the benefit and the purpose in it. But what it ended up doing was I naturally withdrew from people and from life, and it affected my attitude and my lens. And I remember my husband telling me, like, you just sit in the corner and you just looked depressed. Well, because I was, right? And I'd cry myself to sleep, and I didn't know why. I just was just in this hole. And it started to affect how I showed up at work. And I ultimately, for the first time in my life, took a leave from work.
Do you see that in a lot of successful people, right? Like we get to be in Gary's top 100 and a lot of our peers, it's eerie how many, when we get like this, right?
Yeah.
In real conversations, how similar our struggles are, right? And our journey. Is it this addiction to work that we have, right? Is it this need to, like you said, I mean, most people would get the job done and move on. And yet a lot of us as top performers will just do it and do it and do it and do it. And it's this addiction to doing it.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that is it, and that was the worst of it. And so I ended up, what I would say is not even feeling through that. Like I just failed, y'all. Like that was it. Rock bottom, I'm out. Quit my job, the whole thing, because I was so beyond repair. Yeah. Right? So I think that I oftentimes, David, don't even see that in my present day because I just get caught up in that same vicious circle and cycle of just being so blind to anything that's happening around me aside from what needs to be accomplished.
What do you think? I know some of these answers, but what do you think are some of the triggers that people should be aware of, right? When they're in that moment? Because I do think we talk a lot about the whole reason Purpose got started was us, Dusty and I, looking to the outside world to fulfill a need, an internal need, right? We were trying to be successful through our business in hopes that it would fill that void a little bit, right? And what we realized was like that just wasn't healthy, right? It wasn't right. But what are some of the triggers as you've gone through that and learned?
So interestingly, my coach, Jordan Freed, tries to alert me, love that guy, to the triggers first. And to be honest with you, sometimes, again, you get so focused that you're like, what do you mean? There's a trigger before I'm like in the dumps? Huh? Right?
Yeah.
So I think one thing I've started to do is on a Sunday, just take a moment and go, what does my week look like ahead of me and what can I give away versus feeling like I have to do all of it? Because I think that I'm not adept enough to recognize the triggers. So I've had to put in placeholders, if you will, that are constant reminders for me to look ahead before I'm in the pit.
Yeah.
Because I would think that most people might recognize triggers, and I think that the only ones that you can maybe pay attention to is how are you treating the people around you? How are you responding differently than you normally do? Because your emotions show
I
first.
love that.
Right?
Yeah, how you're treating people around you. And, is that a red flag, right? Is that a warning sign? Like, am I not being myself? Am I not being present? Am I not being my best self for the people that really need me?
Yeah.
And Dr. Taylor, you've talked about putting in hacks into your time block schedule, right? To be able to
for sure
make yourself stop, right?
Absolutely.
And how have you seen that show up?
Yeah. I mean, I think the time block schedule certainly helps. And it's funny you mentioned like looking at the week ahead, because I actually put in the schedule the same thing. It's like on Sunday, I have to look at what's coming up and determine so many times there are overlapping things, right? And of course, right? That never happens. So determining like, where do I need to be? And I think that's a good point about who do I need to be maybe is sometimes something that I could reflect more on in these situations, right? Because sometimes I'm training, right? I'm in the training room. Sometimes I'm supporting. Sometimes we have events, right? Like so many great things that are happening. And we're providing a lot of experiences in that. We're always providing experiences, whether we're with our kids or with our, spouse, or we're at an event or training or coaching. So I think to that end, yes, time block schedules are super helpful. But the intentionality you mentioned behind who I want to be in those scenarios and how I can best show up and schedule when I have multiple things, like who really needs me there, right?
Yeah.
And how can I break that up in an effective way so that everyone gets what they need, maybe not always what they want, right? But we're doing what's most important.
And I think my lesson in the last year has been who, not how. We hear that in Gary's room sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not always how. And I think those of us, David, to your point, that are just wired to do more, need to be asking ourselves that more often, who, not how. Because I will inevitably just show up in my day and be like, I have to do all these things.
Yeah.
And that's just not reality. And usually
that's my
people...
superpower is that I'm not good at anything. So I show up and go... If I do it, it's not going to get done very well. And
Mr.
so then I go like, who can do this? But we were on a call the other day, and I was like, let's be real clear. Whatever you ask of me, I'm just going to go find someone else to do it, because like that's the only way I know that how it will get done really, really well.
It's a wonderful lesson.
Laziness has been my superpower.
Love that. No, I'd like to learn that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes in seasons, right? I will say that I've talked to so many of our peers. Not just in real estate, but just business owners, that while COVID was disruptive, we did learn to live life differently. Right? I think we learned to live in the moment more. We learned to spend the time with our family. We were forced to do more, and it was a great, short of the pandemic and the sickness that it caused, was a great realization, right?
Yeah, without a doubt.
And I was talking to a friend of mine that owns a company the other day. I'm like, oh, you remember the days when we would get up and we would go to the gym, and then we would leave the gym and we would go on a 3 or 4 mile run, and then we'd go shower and eat, and then our day would start. And like the market was really good, right? The economy was really good, and we were able to be a little bit more alive. But in seasons now, right? As of last summer and last March, when Gary started talking about a shift, I had to turn around and go, okay, that's gone.
Yeah.
Right. By choice for me. And I have worked way more. We started Dr. Taylor, 6, 7, 8, 9 different companies, maybe even more in the last 12 months. And I look up and go, oh my God, I'm in this point again. Right. Where I'm just build, go find people, serve. I'm trying to give myself a pass at the moment, because I try to say like, but it's just a season, right? But I think in order for it to be a season,
careful about that.
I have to have a finish line.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? We talk a lot
true.
about in the purpose room, playing football just to move the ball 10 yards at a time is exhausting. If there's no end zone, right? If we don't know what we're after, not just for you, but the people around you, right? I found my spouse and my children are much more forgiving when I say, like, I need to do this, but here's the cutoff and here's what the goal is, and this is why I'm doing it. If I'm just going to do it forever, then it's like, Dad, we don't care if you're a great realtor, right? And if I say, like, hey, I need to go get this done so that it helps these people and it's just for this, we get it, right? They understand it. You said you'd kind of learn that lesson. Where do you see that failure showing up today? Or where do you see maybe a failure that you went through in the last 5 years where at the time it was really miserable, but you can kind of look back and go, I'm grateful that God put me in that situation because he was teaching me this. I said to somebody the other day, and I'll let you answer. Sorry, I don't mean to ask a question.
No, you're good.
She said, why do I keep going through this? And maybe you haven't learned the lesson God's trying to teach you yet. Right? Like maybe there's something in here that we need to try to understand. And so I just think, like, I find myself, I'm going through the same thing. Like, man, I'm V8 moment. And in hindsight, we can see it a little bit more. Right? Where do you see that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a few things that I think about, and it's funny that you talk about that. I was talking with Jordan, and I said, why do I have to learn this the hard way? And he was like, Shelby, like, did you hear what you just said? Like, that's usually the way we learn everything.
That's right.
I'm like, oh.
When's the last time you learned something the easy way?
right?
That's right.
That would be great.
I need one of those moments.
Yeah.
And so I have had to learn to give myself grace. But I think the two things that stand out the most are that time in corporate America when I resigned because I had to. I had to restart because I knew if I went back to the same environment, I would be the same old me. And I needed to learn the lesson, not just cope with it, right? And so that closed a door that, quite honestly, I thought I was going to be in forever. And yet, to your point, God always laughs at our plans because you go, what in the world? Like, that was my life plan.
Yeah.
And he was like, you know what, Shelby, just be patient in the moment because I have better plans for you. And the way that my life has evolved since 2013 and the opportunities that have come my way since 2013 are far greater and allow me to be a far more present mom and wife than that opportunity would have ever allowed me. The second time would be when I got out of leadership at KW. I know I'm in it right now.
I was like, did you though?
But I did get out for a while.
Took a sabbatical.
I took a sabbatical. I went from team leader to OP to regional area director. And for me, that was a misaligned role. And it is an exceptional role for the right people, but not every person is right for the same role, right?
Sure.
Absolutely.
And I think each of us are uniquely given these gift zones that God says, this is your natural thing.
Yeah.
And everyone has one.
Yeah.
And I am so passionate about this. And one day I will launch a company that enables teenagers and those in their young 20s to try and find that gift zone or that purpose, that calling.
It's a good word. Finding the purpose.
Yeah. You like that?
We really like that one.
I thought you two would like that because I heard a little bit about that on
That's
a
right.
former podcast. But that, it opened the door to me finding a different space that ended up being a better fit.
Yeah.
That has created more opportunities. And by the way, it's not about the benefits.
Sure.
Sometimes it's just about the obedience, right? And knowing that is not
It's a great
for
word
you.
for it. Yeah.
I like
And
When you fight when you fight the obedience, right? That's when I think the lessons, right, really start to show up.
The difficult lessons.
Yeah. They're there.
They
Obedience is
are.
a good word. Yep.
Yeah.
I read a book a million years ago, and it was called When Godly People Do Ungodly Things. And to be honest with you, I don't remember a lick about the book except for one phrase, which said, you have to make the obedient choice and trust that your heart will catch up. And that has
Good stuff.
been like an instrumental turning point for me in so many arenas of my life for years on end.
So say it one more time so we don't have to rewind the podcast.
Yeah. Make the obedient choice and trust that your heart will catch up.
That's awesome.
Right? Like you think of all these bold laws and, we all make decisions based on feelings and that gets us into dangerous places.
Sure.
And so that phrase to me means like, just make the right choice and trust that your feelings will catch up. Everything will be fine.
That's right.
But it doesn't mean that it's easy in that moment when you have to make a shift.
That's right. Yeah, especially because usually battling the emotions. I read a book called Halftime. My pastor gave it to me, and it really talks about if you kind of break life up into quarters, right? And 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, 80 years. And I just turned 40 a few years ago when he gave it to me, and he's like, you're in the second half. And the book talks about moving from success to significance, right? And I think, there's anything I can go back and tell my younger self or tell some of our younger listeners, it's that it's all in seasons, right? Like you thinking that you're going to have that corporate job forever, right? And I remember thinking about that when I worked for a corporation, thinking like that was it. And now I almost use it in reverse. I tell my wife, I'm like, one day we're going to look back and like, remember that little real estate team we had that they used to sell houses, because it's an evolution, right? And you grow and you develop and you go through these seasons. It's about a 5 to 7 year cycle, it seems like. And you get to learn new things. And then you get to, the thing that I love right now that we're getting to do through Purpose and Level 8 is really turn around and pour into others, right? As we had to kind of evolve through the shifting market last year, we said, how do we not go lay off our workers, right? As sales are going down, revenue's going down, we were closing down locations around the country. And we said, well, we've still got all these amazing people. And Gary had been pushing us for a few years to start a platform. And so it was, and I think about like how hard the last year has been and how much I've been back in the thick of it, right? How much time and energy it's taking, and it's exhausting, right? It takes
sure
like you wake up immediately thinking about it, and you fall asleep on the couch with your laptop open, right? And God bless my wife and children for being a part of the journey with me. But I also had that challenge not showed up, had the market not shifted, had we not started getting out of business with people, which was painful, it wouldn't have forced me to go out and look for new ways to serve, new ways to solve, right? Really to keep our people from getting laid off. And now I look up and we went from a $200 million organization to a $500 million organization. Being able to share in the journey with more people and sharing in resources, you're like, man, this is awesome, right? It wasn't always awesome it's not always awesome today, right?
Well, sure. But that, I think, is such a good reminder for all of us. And I'm going to speak as if I'm 80, and I'm not, by the way, just to be clear. But, you get a little bit closer to midway through life, and you realize that life is full of lots of seasons and lots of choices and lots of fear. And for me, I think I've defined failure as fear. And transparently, sometimes I choose not to embrace it and I cower backwards.
We all do.
But in the moments that I decide to make the choice to face it, and I was telling Dr. Laurna, one of my mentors said, make a decision and then make it right. And so
I really like that.
It's not about whether the decision was right or wrong, but now you have the choice to make it right.
Right.
And there are many times still where my perfectionism gets in the way, and that's my fear, and it ends up being a failure because I could have gone further quicker. But there are other times that I, charge the storm, if you will. I proceed anyway. I take the risk. It is my choice, and I'm going to make it right.
Well, it's making 1,000 pots instead of trying to make the perfect one. And isn't it amazing? The end result is rarely ever even close to what you set out to do.
Doomsday, which is what you see when you're making it.
That's true, right? But even when I set out on a business journey or a goal, a model, spiritual, whatever it is, when I get there, it looks so drastically different. And ultimately, right, we all know it's about who you became in that process, right? It's the obstacle is the way, right? Mentality of and I think with, again, with age, you start to lean into that process a little bit more and realize that ultimately it just doesn't matter.
But I wish I would have known that in my 20s.
Oh, sure.
Right?
100%.
That's the message.
When I'm in the third quarter, right? When I'm in my 60s, I'm going to look back and like, oh man, you're such a bonehead, right? This or that or the other. And that's where it's the little, you'll see it on a bumper sticker, like, oh, my grandma said that to me, and it's so true. Why won't my kids listen? And it just comes and goes so quick. So I know we're running out of time. I want to ask you. All right, so we get to the end of life, right? You've had an amazing journey, and you kind of look back. And right now, what do you anticipate your biggest regret being?
It's probably trickier to answer than maybe some. And my intuitive gut response to that was my kids.
Sure.
Right? Because, there's this life exercise that Brian Gubernick introduced to us, and he was like, you only have X amount more Christmases with your dad. And I'm like, oh my word, that's the same for my children, in my home. And sometimes my husband laughs at me because my 9-year-old boy will still want to be held by me. And I'm like, look, I will hold him until the day he asks me not to.
Absolutely.
Right? He might be 18 and I'm going to be like, oh, this is really awkward, but if you want to be held, I'll hold you. So I don't, I'm aware of that, but I think that the other thing I will regret is not making the most of the opportunities the Lord gives me. Because I get paralyzed in fear, like I talked about. And I just think that I am here for a reason, and I need to proceed in that vein in faith.
Well, and I think that gives us some of the ability to overcome the fear, right? It's the scripture of when all this is done and I return home that God looks at me and says, well done, my good and faithful servant, right?
Yeah.
And it's that piece that you go like, let's go try it, right?
Yeah.
Let's go, let's not just go through life existing, right? Like, let's go out here and attack and be aggressive and just try living.
Yeah.
Right? We live in the best country on earth, despite all of our challenges with it. And there's so much opportunity to get out and live that we don't, I think you're right? We don't want to get to the end and then look back and be like, oh, I squandered it, or I didn't. We're never going to be able to do it all, right? But we can definitely lean in and take advantage. So thank you so much for sharing some time with us today, guys.
Thanks for having me so much.
If someone wanted to get in touch with you or reach out, what's the easiest way to get a hold of you?
Well, I guess you could look me up on Facebook, Shelby Ryburn, or at shelbyryburn@kw.com, or 916-677-6400.
Perfect. What markets do you serve? We want to send you referrals.
I serve Greater Sacramento and everything around it. Awesome. So within an hour of Greater Sacramento, California.
Awesome. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, take care.